Okay, welcome everyone to this event of today that we are presenting Dr. Vanessa Sinclair in Corpo Freudiano, Vancouver. She's going to be talking about scansion in psychoanalysis and art with with her. She's going to be talking this concept about scansion that is coming from the Lacanian way of doing certain interventions, but also she's going to talk about that, how that relates to art. Vanessa Sinclair is a psychoanalyst in private practice who works remotely online with people all over the world. She hosts the international renowned podcast Rendering Unconscious, which was awarded the 2023 Gradiva Award for Digital Media by the National Association for the Advancement of Psychoanalysis. Dr. Sinclair is the author of Things Happen 2024, Scansion in Psychoanalysis and Art, The Cut in Creation 2021, The Pathways of the Heart 2021, and Switching Mirrors 2016. And she is the editor of Psychoanalytic Perspectives on the Films of Ingmar Bergman, From Freud to Lacan and Beyond of 2023, as well as the Rendering Unconscious Psychoanalytic Perspective book series. Her most recent book is The Queerness of Psychoanalysis from Freud and Lacan to Laplanche and Beyond, co-edited with Elizabeth Punzi and Miriam Sauer. Welcome, Vanessa. It's a pleasure to have you here. We are meeting in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. It's a pleasure to have you here, and welcome, Vanessa. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. And I will share. Let's see, I need to share my screen. There it is. There we go. All right. Everyone see that okay? Great. Yeah, so thank you so much, Hilda, for inviting me. It's so nice to be able to speak to you at Corpo Freudiano, Vancouver. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I don't have to say much. I will say that I'll give you all my website, and I also run a group that meets at 9 o'clock Vancouver time on Tuesdays for people that have relocated to another country. So if you've moved or are thinking about moving or planning to move, you're welcome to join us. It is sliding scale, so don't worry about not being able to afford it. I'm basically everything I do is always sliding scale. So please feel free and contact me if you're interested in individual or group sessions, because even if it's not a good fit with us for whatever reason, or I don't have time or something, I have a huge network of people I can refer to, and I can always help you find someone. I think that's important because it's hard to find a good analyst. So I'm happy to help. And if you want to follow me on social media, it's Rendering Unconscious at Instagram. And Rendering Unconscious has recently moved to Substack. So if you want to head to Substack and subscribe there, that's of course greatly appreciated. Rendering's been going on for more than 7 years. And yeah, we need to keep it going. I was getting a little tired, so I moved it over to Substack so maybe I can get a little support. I didn't want to accept advertising. I get contacted by things like BetterHelp and stuff, and I didn't want like BetterHelp ads in my podcast. So I figure we'll keep it independent, grassroots, and a space of integrity where we can speak freely about whatever we want, whenever we want, because that's very important, especially with everything going on today. Um, Also, if you're interested in this topic and you like it, I am teaching a 4-week course on it that's going to go very in depth into all these artists and many, many more, and to more psychoanalytic concepts. It's 4 weeks starting May 25th, and that's going to be on Sundays at the same time, actually, for 4 Sundays in a row. So just so you know, that's through Morbid Anatomy Museum, which is their morbidanatomy.org/classes, and all the events I do. You can find everything at my website. So, all right. And I thought I would tell you a little bit about how my work on scansion psychoanalysis and art came about, because I was thinking about it recently and it's kind of interesting. So when I was in New York, I'm originally from Miami. And then I did my postdoc in Arcata, California at Humboldt State University. So there was a little time, 1 year in the Pacific Northwest, and it was beautiful. I would have stayed there, but it was 2000 to 2008. And yeah, the economy collapsed then too, and they cut the job. So I had to move to New York where I could find a job. But it's a beautiful area, and I love the redwoods. And when I moved to New York, I went to New York Psychoanalytic for 3 years. And then while I was at New York Psychoanalytic doing like very traditional training, I discovered Lacan. And then, of course, once you start reading Lacan, you can't read this other stuff anymore. At least that was my experience. So I ended up fleeing that institute and getting a Lacanian analyst and a Lacanian supervisor and a Lacanian cartel, and the rest is history. But while I was still at the Institute, someone had asked me, it must have been 2010, someone had asked me to do like a book review of this book that had just come out, 100 Years of the IPA, because they started in 1910. It was 2010. And while I was reviewing that book and reading it, an artist friend of mine uh, made like a Dada-esque kind of collage book piece, and he asked me to write the foreword for it. So I was like getting into Dada and looking at that and looking at his book and reading more about the Dadas. And then I realized like everything I was reading about in these two books was like from the same time period, and I thought that was interesting. And I was thinking more about how usually when people think of psychoanalysis, they think of the surrealists because they were so openly interested in Freud's theories and espoused them. But the Dadas, I feel like the way they worked, like doing collage and cut ups and things that we'll talk about, seem more reflective of actually like the process of psychoanalysis and the processes of the unconscious. And more than like, I was thinking of it as like the surrealists kind of have the manifest content of the dreams and things like that, but the Dadas really get to more of like the workings of the unconscious and the way I experience psychoanalysis anyway. Um, so yeah, so I started making that connection and I wrote a paper about it. And I had it as like a candidate paper for like a contest at the Institute. And of course, they hated it. Because yeah, they're not interested in talking about scansion and art and New York psychoanalytic. But I actually, when I met my husband, he's an author, and I went to one of his book launches in New York in 2013, which is right when I had just left the institute. And then he does like a kind of independent journal that he publishes that he's done for a long time. And he said, "Oh, I'm about to put out the next issue. If you have anything that is interested between like the arts and that sort of thing." And I said, "Oh, actually, I have this piece on Dada and psychoanalysis," and he loved it. So that was great, and the rest is history there as well. So yeah, so that was fun. And these are two pictures. This one's by Francis Picabia and Rel Hausman, just so you know. And then when I was in New York, I realized, oh, I can't move my, no, there we go. Great. Yeah, then I realized I used to like to write art reviews about different artists for like the Brooklyn Rail and different kind of online magazines, art magazines. And I realized that I was writing, a lot of the artists I was writing about were kind of working in a similar way with the cut. And I was like immersing myself in Lacan. I started dating Genesis Purge, who we'll see a little bit about a little bit later, who's in this collage with me. And then yeah, me and Jen were working on cut-ups and collages, and I started writing about Jen's work, specifically this Pandrogyny project that Jen did with their late wife, Lady J. And yeah, I started writing about it from a psychoanalytic perspective and just immersing myself more and more in like the idea of like cut-ups and the cut, and it could be the cut in film or cutting the body or cutting sound or cutting all different sorts of things. And I realized there was a red thread there. So I started kind of putting together those articles and writings I had done and forming them into a book, which became the book Scansion and Psychoanalysis and Art, which came out at the end of 2020. And it's very nice to be able to talk about this work. It's, of course, still the way I work. I still love these artists and write about these things. But it's nice because it came out, 2020 was a little hectic, as we all remember. So I feel like the book came out and it was just like, boom, and it didn't really get like I didn't really do as much with it as I would have liked, had it come out at a different time, I'll say. So it's really nice to kind of get to revisit it and look at the work and reread it. And yeah, it's been fun to get back into it. So that was really nice. All right, so let's get into it. Of course, we start with Freud, and now I'm going to read to be a little more formal. The relationship between psychoanalysis and the fine arts is long and rich, and in fact has been present since the very beginning. As Sigmund Freud was developing the field of psychoanalysis, he applied his new and evolving concepts to the study of individuals, groups, and culture, as well as to artworks and artists, including Da Vinci and Michelangelo. In the Moses of Michelangelo, Freud began, I may say at once I am no connoisseur in art, but simply a layman. Nevertheless, works of art do exercise a powerful effect on me, especially those of literature and sculpture. Freud tended to critique art the way one would analyze a dream, by taking apart the various components of the piece and making greater sense of the whole through the exploration of its parts. Freud felt that by applying the method of psychoanalysis to art and literature, one could decipher the underlying meaning and intention of the creator of the work of art, much as one analyzes the manifest content of a dream to unearth the latent content at play beneath the surface. I, however, am more interested in the process of creation itself, the creative act, rather than looking at the aesthetic value, details, or symbols of the resulting artworks themselves. My focus remains on the process, the moment, the spark of inspiration that occurs in the creation of a work of art, and the potential of this act to subvert the capability art and psychoanalysis have to challenge narratives, systems of control, and oppression by dislocating one from the expected, the norm that up until that point had been maintained as the status quo. The advent of Jacques Lacan brought the concept of scansion into psychoanalytic theory and practice. With this, Lacan highlighted the potential power and value that disruption of the expected narrative may have. This is an image from a film by Pierre Bismuth called Following the Left Hand of Jacques Lacan, The Soul of in the Unconscious from 2012. And the squiggles you see there, he traced the movements of Lacan's left hand while he was speaking. So it's just fantastic. Lacan argued that it's best for an analysand to leave the session in a moment of engaged possibility rather than at the end of a set period of time. The consistency of the same 50 minutes of a traditional session allowed the analysand to learn unconsciously when the time of the session is coming to an end, even if there's no clock or way of referring to time physically present in the room. Clinicians have observed a variety of situations in which the analysand defensively, often unconsciously, utilizes the frame of the standard 50-minute session. For example, the analysand might ruminate, mull over, and rehash material from their day for 45 minutes, only to drop a bomb of information in the last moments before the end of a session. In this case, there's no time left in the static frame of a session to be able to properly address the material presented. Unconsciously, the analysand knows this and in fact presented the material in a way to be able to release it while at the same time not having to fully confront it. In this way, the static session time has been used in a defensive manner, allowing the analysand to exit the session without addressing the matter just raised. In another scenario, an analysand might be slow to warm up in the beginning, then able to open up more towards the middle of session. Typically, this is when those aha moments are experienced and deeper material is reached. Then, as the session begins to come to an end, the analysand may seem to backpedal, refute, or otherwise undo the insights just gleaned, as they put their defenses back into place in preparation to leave the session and return to the world outside. It may be argued that this is a necessary part of the process, as it may not be preferable for the analysand to re-enter the social realm in such a raw, open state, and that may make sense when a person is only attending session once a week or every other week. However, in analysis, the analysand will likely meet the analyst again in a day or two, or perhaps even the next day. Therefore, the overall frame of the treatment, plus the increased frequency of sessions, typical in psychoanalysis, provides enough of a secure holding environment for the analysand. And as much of what happens in a psychoanalytic treatment occurs outside of the session, in the analysand's day to day life, it may be argued that with this frame of frequency and rapport in place, it's not only safe but potentially even more productive for the analysand to leave session in the midst of one of those aha moments, rather than at the end of an allotted amount of time, after all the defensives have been put back into place. In this way, the analysand is more likely to continue to reflect on the material just experienced in session even after the session has ended, and the psychoanalytic work can continue outside of session, as opposed to when an analysand leaves the session after having resutured the unconscious. As Celeste Petrusa and Derek Hook say in their fantastic paper, You're Kicking Me Out, when when then seems difficult to deny is that while the conventional 50-minute session provides a secure, regular, and containing space within which the patients may speak, what it forecloses are the prospective therapeutic benefits related to the effects of interruption and suspension, separation, and non-resolution. This is a gross explanation of the idea behind Lacan's infamous variable length session, which many call the cut session or short session, because although the theory is that the session could be any length from 5 minutes to 2 hours or more, since the end of session comes not after an allotted amount of time, but rather is based on the productions of the analysand's speech. The reality is that Lacan tended towards shorter sessions as opposed to longer, and so do Lacanians more generally. Unfortunately, that is one of the arguments against using variable length sessions in practice. But whether one agrees with the idea of a cut session or not, we can still see the value behind this concept. The idea that there is value in marking these moments where the analysand's unconscious appears more open, when slips of the tongue occur or jokes are made, to help bring them to the analysand's attention. Lacan developed methods to highlight these moments, using scansion as a way to punctuate or note these instances when the unconscious slips out. One way is by ending the session abruptly. However, one may also mark these moments through various other interventions, such as reflecting the analysand's own language, marking a signifier by simply repeating a word. An intervention as simple as that can be quite effective. This moment, the pause created by such an intervention, is also a disruption, a scan, a cut. The cut engenders anti-normalization. Anything normative fixes desire, including our identity ego, itself a construct formed via a lifetime of identifications and projections. As we begin to believe this construct is indeed ourself, it may become more rigid over time and even stagnant. Scansion is a means to shake up the stories we tell ourselves and hold on to ever so tightly. It allows us space so that we may see there are alternatives, options, and possibilities. When an analysand is speaking, I sometimes ask, whose words are those? I've noticed that analysands are often actually reiterating narratives imposed on them by parents, family, and society, sometimes since birth or even since before birth. We are born into history, language, and social structures. Our words and positions are not our own. We are introjected into an interplay of interpersonal dynamics, projections, dreams, wishes, and desires, as well as social systems, all of which precede us. Psychoanalysis allows for a place where we may take a step back from these dynamics at play, for even just a moment, to look at the forces at work and begin to be able to make choices from our position within these discourses, rather than feeling as if we are constantly caught up in them. enacting and reacting to dynamics at play that we are not consciously aware of, but nevertheless affect us pervasively, from within as well as from without. The method of scansion has been applied throughout the arts, music, literature, and poetry, as well as in psychoanalysis, and in many ways the effect is similar. This is a collage I made for the cover of the book. Historically, in poetry, scansion is a method of describing the rhythm of a poem through the breaking up of its lines or verses into feet, working on meter, marking the locations of stresses, accented and unaccented syllables, and so on. Adapted from the classical method of analyzing ancient Greek and Roman verse, scansion can be thought of in terms of scanning, examining a line or verse to determine its rhythm, thereby revealing the underlying mechanics or structure of a poem. The purpose of scansion is to enhance the reader's sensitivity to the ways in which rhythmic elements in a poem convey meaning. Deviations in a poem's metrical pattern are often significant to the meaning as well. This method of scansion has been utilized in a similar way regarding the rhythm and form of pieces of music. After all, what is rhythm but a series of punctuations or cuts? If there were no cut, we would just be left with one endless note or tone. When framed in this way, one may see the similarities of scansion in poetry and music to Lacan's concept of scansion, and also to Freud's concept of evenly suspended attention that the analyst is encouraged to maintain. Just as the reader scans a poem or piece of music to locate the underlying structure and rhythm, as well as deviations from that framework, the analyst attempts to maintain the free-floating attention conducive to noting signifiers, slips, double entendre, patterns of transference, displacement, condensation, metonymy, and metaphor. By creating what might in poetry be thought of as a line break, Scansion cuts the analysand's speech, leaving them with a sense of ambiguity and multiplicity. The analyst does not directly interpret, and thus the last words of a session become not the very last words on a matter, but instead jumping off points for the analysand's free association and unconscious productions. I propose that scansion is another royal road to the unconscious, like free association and dreams. Resonant of the fundamental cut inherent in our subjectivity, scansion highlights the divide between conscious and the unconscious, self and other, dream and waking states. With his fundamental rule of free association, Freud encouraged analysands to follow their train of thought wherever it led. In the course of our day-to-day lives, there are many thoughts and associations we reflexively push aside so that we may continue with the story we are relating to ourselves. We tend to work hard to maintain focus on the narrative we have developed of ourselves, others, and the world, and we often adhere to them rigidly, even bending new information to fit within our preconceived structure rather than daring to augment ourselves or our beliefs in order to integrate fresh insights that we've gleaned. The practice of free association encourages us to disrupt this tendency of ours. Freud implored us to follow these seemingly tangential trains of thought wherever they might lead, as they always prove to be relevant, even if the connection is not immediately clear. In much the same way, Freud encouraged us to pay attention to our dreams. Rather than feeling as if we must retell the fragmented dream material in a concise and cohesive way, Freud recognized these various dream scenes for the fragments that they are. Instead of attempting to fit the various sequences of the dream into a coherent narrative that you may then tell yourself and others, take each piece of the dream and associate to it. For example, if there's a specific person present in the dream, ask yourself, what might that person remind you of? What aspect of yourself or quality could they symbolize? What comes to mind when you consider a particular color, number, word, or phrase present in a dream? Each dream element is a condensation of a multiplicity of material from the past and present. The process of dream work allows for deeply repressed material to once again come into conscious recollection, albeit in disguised and therefore more bearable ways. The psychic censor, as Freud called it, decides what is manageable and thus permitted and what is not. Lacan even described the operation of the psychic censor as censorship by scissors. The mental work of waking life is actually more akin to dream work than we tend to realize. In our waking state, we are bombarded with an influx of information. Scenes caught in our periphery, words and phrases uttered, jingles and advertisements overwhelm our senses, striking chords within us and bringing up information from the depths of our unconscious constantly throughout the day. In order to function in our daily lives, we have learned to block out this flood of sensory input coming at us from all directions. We tend to prioritize adherence to our narrative storylines as a means of keeping ourselves focused and quote unquote on track. But over time, these tracks may become ruts. And like many symptoms, what started out as an adaptive measure aiding us in maintaining focus may end up narrowing our view and thus limiting our potential. In this era of biopower, when people are being stripped of their humanity, reduced to numbers and units of production, it is more important than ever to reassert what's ours, our inherent creative potential. We have built the world around us. All of what we have created began as an idea or spark of information. Therefore, it is possible to reinvent ourselves and our society as well. It often may feel as if we are trapped, as if it is beyond our control, but it is not so. As those who have been through the process of psychoanalysis know, what at one time felt inevitable or irrefutable may be revealed to be an ingrained pattern. This pattern may run generations deep, and we might very well be identified with it. We might mistake it for ourselves. But once we are able to see this, we already have that much space from it, indicating we are not fully aligned with it anymore. We may continue to feel caught up in it at times and may find ourselves engaging in old habits and patterns. But that's all part of the cycle of change. Just as it took many years for these patterns to become ingrained within us, it takes time to work through them and to create new grooves. Scansion helps cut us out of our ruts, out of these narratives we have been told and which we now tell ourselves, so that we may begin to think more freely, see other possibilities, and invent new ways of being in the world. Cut the chains that bind us, so to speak. The cut has a multiplicity of meanings in language and culture, which is reflected in the variety of ways it is used in colloquialisms such as to cut a rug or cut a check. We're proud when we cut the mustard, when we have cut our teeth and have proven to be a cut above the rest. But sometimes we have to cut our losses if we find we didn't make the cut and have landed on the cutting room floor. A cutting remark may cut like a knife, and you may insist that others cut it out. Someone may be a cut up, a ham, a clown, a joker, while others may not be so amused when you're cutting it up and ask you to cut the crap. However, sometimes it's much needed comic relief, and they might just cut you some slack. You may cut a deal to cut a record if someone has cut you a break. Otherwise, you may have to cut out and take your cut and run. In that case, you can always cheer yourself up by cutting up jackpots, trading tall tales with your friends, while enjoying some famous saltwater taffy, which is cut to fit the mouth. As a psychoanalyst concerned with the mind-body system as the interface for the subject in the world, and the inscription on the body as the subject is inserted into culture through language, as well as the study of the cut-up method as applied in the arts, perhaps the most interesting signifier I've encountered in this research is the etymology of the word anatomy. Defined as the study or knowledge of the structure and function of the human body, anatomy was learned from dissection. Anatomical structure derives from the Old French anatomie and directly from the late Latin anatomia. The late and classical Greek terms are anatomia and anatome, respectively. Dissection literally means a cutting up, from ana, up, plus temin, to cut. itself derived from the Proto-Indo-European root term to cut. In the present study, I navigate a line of artists and intellectuals who create through disruption using scansion or the cut, techniques that illuminate the underlying structures and dynamics of the unconscious, the inner workings of free association and dreams, displacement, condensation, metonymy, and metaphor. I chosen to begin with the advent of photography and move through the turn of the previous century, through the onslaught of the Daddas and Surrealists, to the dawn of the millennium, and to contemporary artists of our time. The advent of photography caused a revolution in perspective those of us living today cannot fully grasp. As our culture is so extensively permeated with its effects, it is quite impossible to imagine what life was like before. Not only is photography an aesthetic or artistic medium, but it has become fundamental to daily social culture, as well as bureaucracy and governance, essential in identification, policing, forensics, digital culture, media, television, programming, film, and the internet are all based upon the image. We can hardly imagine our lives without it. Freud himself was flooded with photographic images. The scientists, professors, and medical professionals of his era were awash with this form of visual documentation for the first time. Freud's own views were surely influenced by the culture of photography of his time, which inundated people in his social strata. In her book, Mirrors of Memory, Freud, Photography, and the History of Art, Mary Bergstein writes, because photographs were so frequently perceived as mirrors of memory around the turn of the 20th century, they had a special relevance to the imaginative vision of Freud. As light impressions, photographs seem to mimic, at least in a metaphoric sense, the mental phenomena of memories and dreams. The photograph captures an instant, a slice of time, a moment, visual residue as traces taken from the continuum of lived experience. Capturing that instant both holds it in our grasp and also distances us from it for the same time. To stand behind the lens of a camera puts a shield between the viewer and the viewed, the voyeur and the object gleaned. In a way, photographs and postcards may produce both a familiarity with an item or place, while concurrently creating a feeling of disconnect or dissonance when confronted with the real object and its difference from our expectations and imagining. This may have influenced Freud's own thought process when observing himself, his dreams, his patients, and the world around him. No one captured this slice of time more literally than pioneering British photographer Edward Muybridge, perhaps the most influential photographer of his time, whose work we can see here. And here the model is Percy Madeira, and the keywords are male jumping, standing broad jump. His photographic studies are instantly recognizable as he's not only captured the movement of people, animals, and events frame by frame, but also presented his images in succession as one image consisting of several, revealing what it was then impossible to perceive with the human eye alone. The stages of motion inherent in every move that was made. Seeing our own actions as well as the micro movements involved in such day-to-day aspects of life, which until then humankind had not understood or been able to perceive, revolutionized the way society viewed itself, and of course was a precursor to film. Walter Benjamin even posited that we discover the optical unconscious through photography, just as we uncover the instinctual unconscious via psychoanalysis. Whereas it is commonplace that, for example, we have some idea what is involved in the act of waking, if only in general terms, he says, we have no idea at all what happens during the fraction of a second when a person actually takes a step. Photography, with its devices of slow motion and enlargement, reveals the secret. It is through photography that we first discover the existence of this optical unconscious, just as we discover the instinctual unconscious through psychoanalysis. This type of freeze frame photography, capturing human expressions, movements, and behavior, was also used in the hospital of Jean-Martin Charcot in his infamous studies of hysterics. Early on in his career, Freud spent time working in Charcot's hospital and admired him greatly. Charcot focused on documenting the symptoms of his patients. As an artist and skilled draftsman, Charcot kept detailed drawings in residents' charts, along with written documentation of symptomatology and patient histories. Hysterical symptoms were reproduced in a number of ways, as staged reenactments, sketches, wax and plaster casts, and photographs. Art became a method to immobilize the tumultuous fits of his patients and order the quote unquote savage thrashing into a sequence of static images. Charcot also staged live demonstrations of hysterical symptoms and fits, which became popular outings for fashionable Parisians. Medical students, artists, actors, socialites, and tourists alike flooded to the hospital to witness the madness of the hysterics. The images are most striking, and once viewed tend to stay with us. Photographs of these women in the throes of such violent episodes. Like Muybridge's ability to capture man and animal alike in motion, Charcot's images froze his patients into successive stages of torment, catatonia, grimaces, seizures, emotional outbursts, and paralysis, all captured in his laboratory. Of note, his hospital was said to have housed one of the most cutting-edge photographic laboratories in the world at the time, and Charcot was one of the first lecturers known to use a photographic projector. There's also always an aspect of chance and unpredictability in the act of taking a photograph, especially as the technology developed and trends moved from a focus on portraits to capturing images of life on the streets. As Roland Barthes described in Camera Lucida, Reflections on Photography, a photographer develops a sort of second sense about the moment to best take a photograph, reminiscent of the evenly suspended attention Freud described as ideal for the analytic position, wherein certain moments glisten like gems as discrepancies and signifiers seemingly pop out. With practice, the analyst or photographer learns to act at just the right time to illuminate the moment the unconscious opens, when life at its most poignant or raw slips out. Pioneering French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson, whose image you can see here, described this phenomenon as capturing the decisive moment, the precise moment when one gains a glimpse of the inner workings of a scene, when it all seems to come together, when it's clear that there's more at play than meets the eye. Cartier-Bresson himself expressed the process in a characteristically poetic way. He said, "To take photographs is to hold one's breath when all the faculties converge in the face of fleeting reality. It is putting one's head, one's eye, and one's heart on the same axis." The Surrealists took a new view to photography besides the purely documentary, gleaning messages and meanings not often transparent to the average onlooker, nor even necessarily to the photographer herself, often analyzing the contents of photographs as the way one might analyze a dream. They observed that ordinary, everyday photographs, when uprooted from their practical functions, contain a wealth of unintended, unpredictable meanings. Cartier-Bresson masterfully captured these elements, as well as a sense of liminality in his images, aesthetically integrating the unknowable into the known, the associations beneath the surface of the visual, the latent content underlying the manifest. This image is by Lee Miller. Historically, Surrealism has been the artistic movement most associated with psychoanalysis, as the Surrealists actively promoted Freud's ideas, studied his writings, and explored various methods for uncovering and working with the unconscious. The Surrealists espoused the technique of free association, paying close attention to dreams, slips, synchronicity, and chance. They tended to work in any fashion they found could minimize conscious interference of the ego and the psychic censor, thereby allowing the unconscious to come through. They practiced automatic poetry, writing, and drawing as well. However, it was the Dada movement that was burgeoning just as psychoanalysis was taking hold of Europe. In the years leading up to the First World War, many individuals fled their homelands in search of safety. Switzerland received a large influx of these people as it provided a neutral center amidst the central powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary and the Entente powers of France and Italy. Surrounded by violence and bloodshed, the Swiss found themselves in a tense, albeit unique, position. Soon after the outbreak of the war, German poets Hugo Ball and Emmy Hennings fled to Zurich. While the seeds of Dada had been planted in the years before the war, shaped by the futurists as well as independent artists, the opening of the Cabaret Voltaire in February 1916 is considered the official beginning of the Dada movement. And this is a poster for the opening of the Cabaret Voltaire. This event was monumental in bringing together a variety of artists and intellectuals from varying backgrounds, countries, mediums, orientations, and worldviews. The result was a group of players coalescing in the more or less coherent integrated movement while still maintaining their integrity and diversity of the individuals involved. Ball and Hennings first established the Cabaret Voltaire as a literary cabaret, Ball often accompanying Hennings on the piano while she performed songs and poetry readings. The charisma of the pair attracted other artists and performers, and they were soon joined by local Sophie Taber, German artists Richard Husenbeck and Hans Arp, and Marcel Janco and Tristan Zara from Romania, among others. The synergy of the group, their universal spirit, the revolutionary spirit, poems, productions, and manifestos, sparked an element of vivacious upheaval and produced rambunctious happenings. The Dadas used performative aspect of cabaret to showcase their experiments and artistic endeavors, incorporating popular songs, ballads, and entertainment alongside readings of classical and experimental literary texts. One of the most popular performances was Henning's rendition of Ball's anti-war poem, Totentanz, or Dance of Death, which she sang to the tune of what was then a well-known jingle at the time called This Is How We Live. She sang, "This is how we die, this is how we die. We die every day because they make it so easy to die." Hennings provocatively sang these words accompanied by music and melody that typically was used to invoke patriotism. Thus, this juxtaposition was intended to shake the viewer out of the usual and the expected. This type of act, combining discordant words, form, and content, was typical of Dada performances and artworks, as the artists set out to create an unsettling effect in their audience. At the heart of Dada lay the gratuitous act, the paradoxical, spontaneous gesture aimed at revealing the inconsistency and inanity of conventional beliefs. Both the Dada and psychoanalytic movements were inescapably influenced by the atrocities of World War I. In his An Event Dada, Hulsenbeck reported in 1920 that the Dadaists agreed the reason for the war were materialistic and contrived. The group concurred that politicians are the same everywhere, flat-headed and vile, and described the brutality of war as the moral enemy of every intellectual impulse. Hans Arp wrote of the time, "At Zurich in 1915, disinterested as we were in the slaughterhouses of the World War, we gave ourselves to the fine arts. While the cannon rumbled in the distance, we pasted, recited, versified, we sang with all our soul." For many, the war produced a collapse of confidence in the rhetoric and principles of the culture of logic and rationality that had prevailed across Europe until this time. The birth of mechanized warfare, with its massive death tolls, coupled with the totalitarian politics of the time, produced a sense of the fragility of civilization. In his essay, Thoughts for the Times on War and Death from 1915, Freud described the disorientation of modern man so divided from his nature, expressing disillusionment with the civilized world, in particular the state, and acknowledging the altered attitude towards death that this and every war focuses upon its people. He says, the individual who is not himself a combatant, and so is a cog in the gigantic machine of war, feels bewildered in his orientation and inhibited in his powers and activities. Dada was born in this crisis of disillusionment, its collaborators' wartime experiences greatly influencing their collective body of work. The First World War shifted the terms of battle as it was the first war of the industrialized age. With vast numbers of technological innovations, it was the first global war of its kind and bore moral and intellectual crises. As the experience of the shattered bodies of veterans returning home from war became more and more commonplace, it became reflected in the art of the time. The Dadaists often depicted the casualties of war in their artworks, wounded soldiers and amputees with prosthetic limbs, eventually even positing the conception of a race of half mechanical men. During World War I, many physicians fled to psychoanalysis in an attempt to understand the effects of such trauma on the mind. The war left soldiers with psychological as well as physical wounds. For the first time, the military began to recognize psychological trauma as valid. A large number of those discharged from the service were diagnosed with war neurosis or shell shock. Grafton Elliott Smith was one of the first to describe its pathology and symptomatology, cautioning that for those suffering, reason was not lost, but rather was functioning with painful efficiency. The period of the First World War, with its pervasive destruction, fragmentation, and subsequent reconstruction of both physical world and the psyche, is reflected in the Dada methodology of the cut-up. While there are various ways in which to apply the concept of the cut-up, Tristan Tzar introduced one process in his manifesto to make a Dadaist poem from 1920. He instructs us to take a newspaper, take some scissors, choose from this paper an article the length you want to make your poem. Cut out the article. Next, carefully cut out each of the words that make up the article and put them all into a bag. Shake gently. Next, take out each cutting one after the other. Copy conscientiously in the order in which they left the bag. The poem will resemble you. And there you are, an infinitely original author of charming sensibility, even though unappreciated by the vulgar hand. This is an image that Tristan Tzara made for a Dada bulletin. It's a typographic collage. And this is Hannah Hook, called Hannah and Her Scissors. Dada questions society's accepted values and consensus worldview, challenging the status quo while embracing new ways of thinking, utilizing new materials and methods. Dada quickly shattered certain conceptions about the nature of art, including the appropriate method and mode of creating, as well as viewing and experiencing artwork. Valuing cacophony, dreams, and the violation of syntax as techniques for freeing the unconscious from the domination of reason and tradition, the Dadaists felt that up to this point art had served civilization, and their anti-art would challenge it. This radical rethinking of the creation of art is one of their fundamental achievements. With the end of the war, Dada spread out into various city centers, as many of its proponents returned to their homelands or nearby regions. Letters, postcards, books, journals, and magazines not only provided important means of sharing ideas and images, but were also incorporated into new forms of artwork. This is Francis Picabia. Arguably, the center of Dada migrated to Paris with Tristan Tzara, who joined Picabia there in January 1920. Artists such as Man Ray, Max Ernst, and others also gathered in Paris after the war, bringing with them ideas from other city centers, as well as from New York. Dada, literary Dada flourished in Paris as pamphlets and journals thrived in the early 1920s. Poetry, prose, and short dramatic pieces featured in these Dada journals. Born in 1901, Lacan was coming of age in this time. He embarked on his medical career at a time when in Freud was widespread. France's first psychoanalytic society was founded in Paris in 1926. At the same time, the literary, artistic, and intellectual avant garde were embracing Freud's ideas. According to Elizabeth Rudinesco, she says, whereas the physicians were chauvinistic and took a strictly therapeutic view of psychoanalysis, the writers accepted the idea of a wider sexuality, declined to look on Freudianism as a Germanic culture, quote unquote, and maintained that psychology did not belong exclusively to doctors, a familiar divide we can see in the field that continues to this day. Lacan began to incorporate the dominant views held in the field of medical psychiatry at the time with insights from surrealist experiments and Freudian psychoanalysis. Towards the end of his medical training, he came across an article in the first issue of Surrealism in Service of the Revolution from 1930, in which Salvador Dali proclaimed his theories on paranoia. Here we can see Dali in Philippe Hausmann's Dali Atomicus from 1948. An avid reader of psychoanalytic theory, the first Spanish translation of Freud's interpretation of dreams in 1922 made Dali an almost fanatical Freud enthusiast. According to Rudinesco, this encounter with Dali's theories spawned in Lacan a new understanding of language and its relation to psychosis. The contents of Dali's article, The Rotten Donkey, combined with Lacan's remarkable knowledge of philosophy, contributed to the development of his medical thesis, Paranoid Psychosis and Its Relation to Personality, from 1932, which won Lacan early acclaim. However, Lacan was careful not to note the influence the Surrealists had on his thinking, wary of the effect such knowledge would have on his professors' and colleagues' opinions of his work. He continued to socialize within the same circles as Surrealists and contributed to Surrealist publications such as Minotaur. As World War II became imminent, artists and intellectuals once again began to scatter. Both the Surrealist and psychoanalytic movements were heavily affected. Psychoanalysis and avant-garde art were both claimed to be degenerate. The final Surrealist exhibition before the outbreak of World War II was organized by André Breton in 1938 in Paris, with Paul Eluard, Marcel Duchamp, Dali, Max Ernst Man Ray, among others. Besides this being a quintessential last hurrah of the Surrealist group, the prominent use of mannequins and Man Ray's haunting images of them, of which you can see here one, the doubles, is noteworthy. When reviewing the study of artists who've worked over the past century, it's remarkable how many have explored the concept of the double using mirrors, mannequins, masks, dolls, or puppets in some fashion in their work. From the Dadas to the Surrealists and contemporary artists of our day, many artists explore subjectivity, identity, gender, and sexuality through work with the double. In The Uncanny from 1919, Sigmund Freud described the work of an Austrian psychoanalyst and close companion, Otto Rank, and his exploration of the double. He has gone into the connections the double has with reflections in mirrors, with shadows, guardian spirits, with the belief in the soul, and with the fear of death. For the double was originally an insurance against destruction to the ego, an energetic denial of the power of death, as Rank says, and probably the immortal soul was the first double of the body. French surrealist Pierre Molyneux was born in Bordeaux on Good Friday the 13th. As a young artist, he first established himself as a traditional landscape painter, but soon developed his own unique style, moving into photography, collage, and photomontage. While the surrealists were Molyneux's closest creative companions, he exhibited very rarely during his lifetime. The only solo exhibition he had during his lifetime was organized by Breton in 1957. Much of Molyneux's work consists of self-portraits. He often photographed himself with the aid of mirrors. His home studio was full of them, containing full-length mirrors, mirrors on top of chests of drawers, fastened above his bed, on the fireplace mantel, and on and on. He explored the fluidity of sexuality and experimented with the malleability of identity and gender through his work, using his own body as his central canvas. He took self-portraits wearing lingerie, stockings, wigs, and high heels, among other outfits, which he usually sewed and fashioned himself. And this is an image of him, obviously. Performance artists Briar Peorage became champions of Molyneux as not only a radical aesthete, but as a pioneer of psychosexual and corporeal fluidity. They say, Molyneux's multiple combinations of bodies in particular insist that we mutate, immerse ourselves in potentia. His maps describe a tumultuous reconstruction of our physical self-image. They propose eroticism over replication and androgyny as a natural, even preferred state. Molyneux's work has been described as a suture of photography and painting. He used long exposure times, which resulted in double exposures and other generative chance encounters. Molyneux often intervened on the negative itself, as well as on the proof, reworking them as he saw fit. You can see here he often embellished the eyes, lips, hair, nails, heels, waist, and breasts of his figures. Soon he began working in a way that allowed him to recycle the various fragments that comprise his images. Instead of pacing down his collages, he would cut them out and assemble them and began taking photographs of the montages, and that way he could reuse the different pieces that he had in multiple artworks. And this one's called Vision. The play with the parts of the body and dismemberment of the self is reflective of the true state of being that underlies our unconscious fantasy of seamless self-cohesion and identity. Our underlying experience is one of disturbance, disjunction, and fragmentation. In The Ego and the Id from 1923, Freud stated our ego is first and foremost a body ego. We learn about ourselves and the world via our bodies, especially through our orifices, as these are the spaces where we exchange inside and out, ingest and discharge, are penetrated and expel. These are holes, openings, gaps, but also limits, boundaries, and surfaces. The rim of the mouth, anus, urethra, vagina, nostrils, nipples, eyes, and ears. We may even consider the countless numbers of pores of the skin to be countless numbers of orifices, tiny mouths opening and closing more quickly or slowly depending on our state, mood, level of stimulation, or relaxation. In Gender, Sex, and the Sexual, Jean Laplanche differentiates gender, sex, and sexuality in the following way. Gender is plural. It is oftentimes seen as dual, as in masculine, feminine, but it is not so by nature. It is actually plural, existing on a continuum. Sex is dual. It is so by virtue of sexual reproduction and also by virtue of its human symbolization, which sets and freezes the duality as presence, absence, or phallic castrated. The sexual is multiple, polymorphous. It is the object of psychoanalysis. For Laplanche, sexuality and the unconscious may be seen as one and the same. Sexuality is intrinsically subversive, and sexual identity may change over a person's lifetime or circumstances. Sexuality is fluid and does not have a prescribed object, objective, or path. The drive doesn't work on the whole person or body, but rather is focused on fragments or individual activities. There's only one libido, and therefore there is no psychic representation of the opposition masculine-feminine in the unconscious. The subject is inserted into her sexual nature, sexuality preceding the ego or identity, and for Laplanche, attempts to grasp onto identity may be seen as actually grappling with sexuality. In an attempt to categorize, restrict, and contain it, to give it a limit in an effort to control it. This effort to normalize is where pathology may enter, as normalization fixes desire. Normalization constrains the mobility of desire, orienting it in increasingly limited ways, thus freezing fragments of the unconscious ever more into an identity. However, normalization fails. All paths that sexuality may take are equally valid and complex. In fact, Lacan called the heteronormative prototype the delusional normality of the genital relation. Laplanche felt the displacement of the question of sexual identity onto the question of gender identity conceals the fundamental Freudian discovery, which does not lie in gender identity, sex, or the sexed, but in the sexual, sexuality, and the polymorphous. When Freud speaks of enlarged sexuality, Laplanche states, the sexuality of the three essays, it is always the sexual. It is a sexuality that has been called non-procreative and even primarily non-sexed, as distinct from what is called precisely sexed reproduction. The sexual, then, is not the sexed, it is essentially perverse infantile sexuality. End quote. For Lacan, sexuality is not in the realm of nature or nurture. It is not constricted to nor constructed by either. The unconscious shows how society, culture, and biology are limited and how they fail. Deconstructionists may argue that as bodies, corporeal matter must be realized through the social process of embodiment. However, Lacan does not authorize the constructionist nor deconstructionist argument any more than the biological. He insists that psychoanalytic logic remain fundamentally irreducible to these terms. Queer is opposed to normalization. Liberating sexuality, gender identity, and the sexual expression is thereby a key to subverting control. In 1958, queer artist writer Brian Gysin was living at the Beat Hotel when he discovered what he later called the cut-up method by chance. While cutting a mount for a drawing in room 15, he says, I sliced through a pile of newspapers with my Stanley blade and thought of what I had said to Burroughs some 6 months earlier about the necessity for turning painters' techniques directly into writing. Gysin immediately began picking up raw words and phrases accidentally cut from the newspaper and started piecing them together into texts that would end up becoming the first cut-ups. He noticed that although they weren't created intentionally, the phrasing and sentences, which came together in this seemingly haphazard methodology, seemed to make a certain kind of sense. He says, at the time I thought them hilariously funny and hysterically meaningful. I laughed so hard my neighbors thought I'd flipped. I hope you may discover this unusual pleasure for yourselves. And this is Gysin with his dream machine, which is an artwork that you were to view with your eyes closed. And this is Burroughs at his typewriter, of course. Gysin shared this discovery with his creative collaborator and fellow Beat Hotel residents William Burroughs, Gregory Corso, and Sinclair Bales, and the group worked together with the method for a period of time, creating the first cut-up publication, Minutes to Go, in 1960. Burroughs and Gysin continued their work with cut-ups long after the group left the Beat Hotel. In fact, both of them continued to work with the technique for the rest of their lives. They experimented with using the cut-up method in a variety of mediums and methodologies, including textual, audio, and visual imagery, outlining their early experiments and creative practice together in a book they called The Third Mind from 1978. They state, the cut-up method brings to writers the collage, which has been used by painters for 50 years, and also is used by the moving and still camera. In the 1980s, there began a movement of body modification as tattooing and body piercing were becoming more widespread through the underground and countercultural scenes. In 1987, Alan Oversby, pictured here, a figure in the tattoo piercing and leather scenes, also known as Mr. Sebastian, and 15 others were charged with obscenity and inflicting bodily harm for tattooing and piercing, which, if you can believe it, was still illegal in the UK at that time. The cutting of the real of the body has an effect on the psyche. The body is inserted into culture through language. During this process, signifiers are inscribed into the body. As we enter the world, we are bombarded with a myriad of sensations, impressions, and experiences, both from within ourselves and from the environment. As we attempt to make sense of these experiences, we begin to construct a world of our own, which we come to inhabit. Of course, we have been born into a world that already exists, full of constructed symbolic structures. Our inner world meets this world of social discourse. The world we construct via our bodies does not align with any particular prescribed notions. Of course, we are all affected by the family and society into which we are born, but our reaction to and therefore interaction with these constructs is unique to each of us. The map of signifiers inscribed into our bodies does not necessarily align with particular blueprint nor with specific functions of the body in the physical sense. The whole body is sexual. Freud described this as polymorphous perversity in his 3 essays. There may be particular areas of the body that generally tend to be cathected with libido, i.e., erogenous zones, but each and all parts of a person have an equal chance of becoming charged. This could be how fetishes and erogenous zones could be. Therefore, manipulating the physical body, reforming and reconstructing the body, whether it be through the prick of a needle, the cut of a knife, or a surgeon's scalpel, can have profound effects on the mind, subjectivity, and identity of an individual. Genesis Purge, pictured here, and other members of the Temple of Psychic Youth, which was an underground network associated with Jen's band Psychic TV, showed support publicly for Mr. Sebastian attending his trial and court hearings. This brought extra attention to Peerage, leading to an ever-increasing scrutiny during the era of satanic panic in the late 80s and early 90s, which eventually culminated in the raiding of their home and the subsequent expulsion of the Peerage family from the country. They fled to California, which already had a thriving underground scene. The west coast of the U.S. was home to such characters as performance artist Fakir Musafar. This is a self-portrait of his from 1962. Tattoo artist Don Ed Hardy, for example, and photographer Charles Gatewood, who chronicled the underground tattoo piercing scene and San Francisco LGBT BDSM scene through his photographs. Peerage remained in the United States from the early 90s until her death in 2020. Genesis met her second wife, Lady J. Breyer, in New York, and over time the pair began to immerse themselves in their own performance art experimentations. They donned the moniker Breyer Peerage as an expression of their dedication and commitment to this mutual endeavor. Together, Breyer Peerage explored ideas of identity, the body, consciousness, gender, and sexuality at a depth few have dared to traverse. In an effort to break down prescribed notions of themselves as individuals so that they may come together more fully as one, the pair underwent a series of surgical, medical, chemical, psychological, spiritual, and behavioral procedures. Influenced by the cut-up method of Geisen and Burroughs, the pair took the process that much further, applying the cut-up method not only to word, sound, and image, but to the very real of their own bodies and selves. In a third mind-esque project of their own they called Pandrogyny. In the Pandrogyny Manifesto from 2006, Breyer Peerage state, "We see the eye of our consciousness as a fictional assembly or collage that resides in the environment of the body. One of the central themes of our work is the malleability of physical and behavioral identity. The body is used by the mind as a logo for the self before we are able to speak language." The Dada's created artwork reflecting the fragmentation of the world around them. Geisen and Burroughs' cut-up method showed the cutting up of language creates the space for something new to form. Molyneux illustrated that this also occurs with the cutting up of image, body, and gender, while Breyer Peerage took this even farther. Whether the cut of the scissor or the surgeon's scalpel, by challenging and disrupting repetition of narratives, a space is created where we are able to produce something new. Scansion has proven to be effective not only in psychoanalysis, but when applied to word, image, sound, and also to conceptualizations of self, identity, gender, and sexuality. Sexuality, our creative potential, is inherently subversive, and is at our core. It is the unconscious, foundational to the essence of every subject. The best way to subvert normalization is through the disruption of the narrative of sexuality and thusly identity and gender. People should have the right to self-determination, period. So in the words of Alain Badiou, let's persevere in the interruption. Thank you.
Bravo, Vanessa. Such an interesting and stimulating, lots of thoughts. I'm sure that everybody is having at the moment. Um, let's open to um, questions. Well, I have one first. Well, first of all, like a lot of the things that you have been saying resonate a great deal with the clinical practice, no? Like the cut as going against what I would say discourse or normalization, as you call it, no? And as the royal road to access precisely what is escaping, what it is like it's resisted. I was thinking, I have been thinking a lot about the sort of the emptying of places, right? Like I was thinking a scansion is almost like opening to a place more voided, right? Like some sort of opening to spaces that fragment the images, sort of empty out the ideals, for example, when someone, right, like identifications, etc., is opening to a place more voided, to use the title of a book by some good geographers, Kingsbury and Secor. But I was thinking in terms of the practice of tattoo, I wonder if tattoo is structurally different from the other practices that you have been presenting through the Dada movements and all the various artists that you presented. Is it a difference between like writing something, like almost like covering something? Because for example, with regards to certain of the images that you present, it's precisely opening the void of like the normalization, the discourse, the heteronormativity, those kind of ideals, right? Ideals of beauty, to present an alternative aesthetic that creates some void. But yeah, what is your thought about tattoo particularly? And yeah, and then we open to other conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, I think tattoo would be different in like specifically to like piercing or cutting, like using a scalpel or just ritual cutting, because like you said, it's inscribing a different kind of image on the body while you're also piercing the body at the same time. And that seems fundamentally different than just opening up like possibilities, you know? So yeah, I could totally see that.
All right, right, right. Okay. Yes,
They were
thanks.
more just a connection. It was me trying to connect things. There's the
Right, right, right,
time.
right, right. I mean, it might be the case that that's exactly what a person is needing, right? Like in terms of maybe rewriting the body, no? Like
Mhm.
I was thinking the movie The Pillow Book. I don't remember the filmmaker, but like that sort of ritualistic writing on the body as a way of rewriting, no, like an erotic experience, no, like
Mhm.
Peter Greenaway. Thank you, Desiree and Juan Luis. Yeah, yeah, I love that movie. Any other questions, comments to this rich Alois? Go for it.
Yeah, hi Vanessa. Thanks for the great talk and good to see you again. I was just wondering, I was thinking about something that happened in my own analysis where, because I do it by video like this, where one time my phone was going to die. So I had like when I started the session, I had about I forget, maybe like 5% of my battery power. And the analyst was really upset by that because there was a chance that like our session would just end by like my phone dying. So we came up with like a solution, like we just did like a phone call rather than a video call, and yeah, we managed to make it so that the analyst could actually perform the cut. So rather than the cut being this kind of random, just like caused by like my phone dying. So just wondering whether you think like the cut is always like creative, it's of like the analyst's provenance that it's like something you can't interfere with, or whether like a cut could be, yeah, something more impersonal, something more just random, that, yeah, whether it's a human act or whether it's sometimes just like a force of nature or something like that. So yeah, that was my
I
question.
think we see really interesting cuts with technology, right? Like just like the cut up method, like Brian Geisen was describing, like even when you cut things up so seemingly randomly, when they come back together, they make a certain kind of sense, and that could be just like us making sense of things and finding meaning in things, or however you want to look at it. But I feel like we have like a whole nother level of unconscious, right, that hasn't been written about by these people because we're living in, the digital age. And I feel like with like, when your autocorrect corrects things to the wrong word, but it's like a funny slip anyway, that kind of makes sense. Things like that are happening all the time. And I always think those are really interesting too. In that case, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting because you had your analysis, like, that happened unconsciously where you like had your phone dying for your analysis. And it's kind of interesting to see like where that might have cut off, or like, why, like maybe explore like why you called with only 5% or whatever. Like, yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I actually, like, as you could tell from my presentation, I love Lacan, but since I've left New York, 7 years ago now, I haven't been in the cartel anymore. I was in my cartel for 5 years. But like now my kind of ideas are becoming my own ideas, where I like pull from Lacan, Laplanche, and Freud, but like, I don't just talk about objet A and the symbol, the registers and all this kind of stuff. I try to explain things in a way that I feel like anyone coming from any psychoanalytic perspective, or even someone who's not an analyst, could understand. Like the book, the Scansion Psychoanalysis, an art book, it's kind of written for people who like avant-garde art so that they can get like psychoanalytic ideas, rather than the other way around. Like I hope maybe some analysts will like, learn about some new artists, but I wrote it in a way that like people who like those artists will be able to like get some psychoanalytic thinking without too much jargon. And I feel like I had on the podcast, I had Tom McGowan once, and we were talking about this in the end in the cut session, because when I had my Lacanian analysis, I feel like sometimes the cut, especially in the beginning of the treatment, would work so well. Like it was also over Zoom. It was with someone in France. And like when she would do it, it would just be like someone smacked me in the face, like, wow, that was like what an insight I would get. But over time, being hysteric, I started kind of like manipulating things. I'd like be like, if I say something like this, then she'll be like, oh, let's cut it. You know what I mean? I kind of started like kind of consciously like doing that, or if I didn't want to talk, be like, oh, if I just say it like this, then she'll cut it. So I saw that as kind of problematic, but of course that's on me for doing that. But anyway, but what I do personally, I don't cut the session like 5 minutes or 20 minutes or something. But what I do is I like to leave kind of the end, like people seeing me know, like we end around 50 minutes, 45 minutes, 55 minutes, like somewhere in that range. And I kind of let them end the session when they feel like they've gotten to a good point. And I feel like when people learn to do that, it works well for them. Because yeah, eventually they don't need to see me anymore, and they can just do their own analysis in their mind for the rest of their lives, like I do. So it's an interesting thought of when to do it, and if it's up to the analyst, because it is also kind of like the whole theory is like we're trying to, like, people are the ones with the answers for their own lives internally, and like we're not supposed to be the subjects supposed to know, right? Like we're not supposed to buy into that idea that we know, but then we're the ones that are supposed to be like in charge of making that cut all the time. Like, I don't know, it's kind of a uh, funny area there.
Great,
Mm.
thank you.
Mm.
I'm glad you said that, Vanessa, because I think that the cut is not only made by by the analyst. I also believe that the cut can be made by the analysand, and by technology, as you said, some rearrangement of the corrector is sometimes very poetic, right? Just suddenly, like, just hits you from somewhere. Or sometimes, like, there's a loud noise or something, like, it's almost like the scansion also opens to the possibility of the chance as well, right? Because this course sort of capitalizes on keeping chance out, right? So it's like yeah, kind of giving that openness. And also the other part that you were saying at the end, like giving just the analyst this power of scansion, right? It's also something that needs to be problematized, right? Like, in what way the style of the analyst is indicating the moment, like yeah, like there's something that the analyst also needs to articulate in what way is doing that, right? So that's wonderful, sort of a conversation. Eric.
I think there were others with hands up before me.
Oh, I didn't see it. So sorry about that. I'll go and I
Desiree,
don't see
Yes,
anyone.
that's
Maybe in the
right.
chat. Yeah.
It's Desiree. Desiree is waiting,
I
and
can,
then me.
but you can go, Eric. It's okay. I can go after you.
Sorry, I didn't see
That's
it.
okay.
My bad. Yeah. Okay. Eric and then Desiree. Thank you, Desiree.
Sure. I mean, I was just thinking about, it's kind of a vague thought, but on this same kind of topic of the end of the session too, I think about working with kids, and also where sometimes also I've read cases where it feels like the child says, okay, I think that's everything I had to tell you today, or something. You go, oh, okay. See you next time then. And also it makes me think of something that comes up sometimes in working, maybe in working with kids in particular, but sometimes adults too, who will take the seat, maybe when you first start, someone comes in, and the seat that, would ostensibly be designated for the analyst or something, the kid goes and sits down in this seat instead. So you sit on the couch or something, and they're in the analyst chair. And I forget who it is who talks about sort of, transference in psychosis being sort of reversed, right? That it's the subject supposed to know is the person, the psychotic subject, and not the analyst in that case. I
François
was
Devoin.
wondering, what's that?
François Devoin. It
Davon?
speaks about that. Yeah, Devoin. Yeah.
Yeah, it made me think about the cuts from the other side there, or something too. I don't know if you had thoughts about that.
Well, I love that. I mean, that's the sort of disruption too, like taking the different position in the room itself. Yeah, and I love that. And I never like, when I had a physical office, I never like would correct people or anything like that. It's always just observing and like thinking about what's going on. I feel like, and that's why I love like when I would read about Scansion and the poetry, it seems to be like, yeah, this mix between like having this, because I don't know about you, but when I'm like in session, it's very different than me like in my day-to-day life. It's like a different kind of consciousness. It's like now I'm in this like more evenly suspended attention, whether it's face to face, or people, now we used to be on the couch, or people doing video chat or just audio like phone. It's always kind of different, but I think it all works, and it can all be psychoanalytic. And I really don't buy into these different, like, this is how psychoanalysis has to be. It has to be on the couch 4 times a week. I will say, when I was in training, and I did have people coming 4 or 5 times a week when I was doing my training analyses, it is different when people come like every day. I mean, of course, it's like if you go to the gym 5 days a week, it's going to be different than if you go to the gym once a week, like it does increase the intensity, of course, but like anything else, but I don't think that doesn't mean you can't have like a psychoanalytic process, once or twice a week, or every other week, even if you're once. I feel like once the process is going, it's going, and it's just kind of getting people into that mode. And that's why I feel like people can start doing like their own cuts or noticing things, because once they kind of understand how it works, like they just start seeing it themselves, in their own lives, even outside of session. So yeah, I love the changing of the positioning, and anything that deviates or brings something to attention in that way is really, yeah, always interesting and fodder for analysis.
made me think that there's a certain way of creating a rhythm there too, right? It's like who establishes the rhythm of the session, or how is it established in the course of the work too, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's why, like, a lot of times when you see someone new, people are like, well, how do you work? And I'm like very flexible. Like I let people decide, do they want video or do they want audio only? I tell them the differences, I think twice a week does work better than once a week, and this is why. But like, ultimately it's up to them. And that can also change, it doesn't have to be the same. Or sometimes if people want me to be more active, I'll be a little more active, like whatever kind of works for them to like get them going, I can do. Because I've always, like, I have a PsyD in clinical psychology. The school I went to, it was not psychoanalytic at all. It was all like, CBT and even behavioral. Like my technique classes in grad school were like literally like this man who was like a behaviorist who gave us like a folder of like, systematic desensitization and like these kinds of things. It was just like stuff I would never do. But anyway, I learned to do that. And like, I know how to do relaxation training. I've worked in hospitals. I worked in an HIV clinic, worked in a student counseling center. I worked in a lot of different places. And so, I think like some of my earliest presentations when I would talk in New York, give talks in New York, like while I was in psychoanalytic training, at like classes at the New School or something, people would invite me to give talks. I was working in a hospital, but even working in a hospital or the HIV clinic, you could still work analytically in these spaces because it doesn't have to be a certain set or setting, and it doesn't have to be an exact same way. It's more about a process of helping the unconscious open in these ways.
And it's a little bit like the difference between the many means that we have at disposal, but yeah, sort of the horizon in which you are like sort of channeling the treatment. I think the means are diverse. Absolutely. Sorry, Desiree, I haven't seen your hand
It's
because
okay. My hand is kind of faded. It's
it
okay.
fades within the
Yeah, I don't know.
background.
It's
Because
That's
it's a cool background.
out of sorts. Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, it's
Okay,
my
Juan
background.
Luis, and then Lilith has also a
Um,
comment. Go for it.
Thanks, Hilda. Thanks, Vanessa. It was a wonderful talk, and the images were amazing. A lot of the things that I wanted to ask were kind of answered, but I do have it's more of a comment, I guess, but maybe there's a question. Um, I do experimental film, and I did film as my education. And I find that, and even though you didn't mention film a lot, but I also underwent psychoanalysis, and I find that there is a horror of the nonsensical that well, not me, but I think other people have mentioned this, that is to do with the feminine, right? And so when you do that in, let's say, if you do an experimental film and it's kind of nonsensical, you already are put in an experimental category. Like I did video poetry, and now my videos are called experimental poetry, even though for me they have meaning, but they do not fit in the category of meaning, if you will. And in terms of the process of analysis, I keep thinking, because you gave a lot of, I've read your book too, which is fascinating. It's very readable, and I was very happy for that in a good way. And I was thinking, but the effect that a cut in a session is very different than a cut in a film, for example, right? Like, because, for example, you can manipulate a lot of things. David Lean did that a lot with sound, where the sound would cut the scene before the scene come, and he kind of created that, which is fascinating because for me that associates with analysis, because it's kind of an après coup. There is the cut, and then afterwards you're gonna realize what that means, right? So I guess my question was, there's two. Like, how do you think about this horror of nonsensical to horror of the feminine? And the other one would be, if there are two or more kinds of cuts, one that effectively cut the jouissance and opens to something, and there's a cut that kind of creates this fetish thing that is fun to cut just for the sake of cutting. Sorry, I don't know if this is too broad of a question, but your talk just brings so many questions and things to me. So thank you so much.
Yes, I also love the question and comments. It's beautiful. Um, I definitely think, yeah, people get freaked out by experimental film, poetry. Like when I was asked to give a talk about cut-ups at like an art institute in Baltimore, and like I had the students like, bring something like some piece of poetry or writing that you like or whatever, and we're gonna cut it up. And like it's amazing to see people freak out about like cutting up words. Like people like really like it really rubs some people the wrong way. And like I remember one of the students actually had to like piece the thing that she cut up back together in the correct way because it was like driving her crazy, which I thought was very interesting. Yeah, so I definitely think that people have a hard time with like getting out of the narrative. We were like so kind of trained and socialized to like stay within our narrative. And if you want to, equate that to the feminine, I totally understand that in Lacanian theory and psychoanalytic theory. I usually think of it as like, that we are very fragmented underneath this kind of surface that we like to present to ourselves in our minds. And I feel like when people are presented with something that's cut up or experimental or juxtaposed, it like speaks to that disorientation that we actually feel under the surface. And it, yeah, really is hard for some people to bear, whereas other people like me love it. Or like, yeah, let's do that more. For sure. Did that answer your question? Was that enough? I don't know. That's where it went.
People like your question, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. Juan Luis.
Yes, hi. So first, Vanessa, thank you so much. What a great talk. What really interesting. I love the images. And precisely going back to Desiree's question, I was thinking of this work by an Uruguayan analyst. He talks a lot about degenerate psychoanalysis. So going back to these beautiful images that you showed and how they were, of course, thought of as degenerate, especially by Nazis, but not only Nazis, like, of course, many other governments across Europe and in many other places in the world still classify some artistic production as degenerate. And I love his work because he reminds us that degenerate is to remove gender from something and thus making it worse or more based. Gender comes not only from the word that gives us other words like engender, like to generate something, but also genus, to classify something. So these beautiful collages and cuts, what they do is that they break or explode the classification which normalizes subjects, bodies, lives, right? We are supposed to receive and accommodate as docilely as we can to these genders, these classifications, and so on. And in that sense, I wanted to introduce another idea that is, of course, associated widely with variable length Lacanian sessions. I really liked what you said. You said a couple of things that I really liked at the beginning of the talk. First, how to keep oneself on track, and tracks become ruts, and these ruts become patterns. I love that image. It made me also think of how Lacan in the third in 74 insists on the groove coming back in analysis, and as with a record, right? A record player. Also, you said I didn't catch the exact wording, but something in the sense of normalization traps desire, like it traps it, and I think it produces the same desire, an expected desire, and particularly in a structural discourse like ours, where the expected subjectivity is that of the consumer. Normalization points to the reproduction of desire in the lines of the commodification of the object of desire. So we are supposed to take the maddening variety and versatility of human sexuality, what you reminded us as perverse and polymorphic, which is the very idea of beauty in sexuality. But again, Freud calls it perverse, which is again a whole thing to think about as degenerate and so on. But I think also Scansion there, as you introduced it, and particularly when you talked about rhythm, right? Scansion breaks this normalization as it introduces another rhythm. Consumption has a very particular rhythm that configures subjectivity in our times. This rush of fashion, always going for the new, and so on. And variable length lessons disturbs this normalized equivalence between time and money, time and value, and time and labor, right? Mm. And people often say, at least that's my experience, you can't end a session now because I paid for a full session. And how come, what am I paying for when I pay for a session? Time is money, we all know that. I'm paying for I must get what I paid for as a customer, a client even, which is in English, the accepted term for analysis and so on, right? So I wanted to introduce from this potency of the degenerate, the exploding and cutting of classifications, also this potency of the cut in the practice of analysis as blowing up one equivalence that is very, very well established in our culture. And again, thank you so much. Well, but yeah, but maybe if you have any thoughts about this.
I just love all those points. I love all of these questions and comments. I wish all groups were like this. Can all of you please come to every event I do? This is
likewise
like discussion ever. They're also such thought-provoking and great insights.
Do you want to say something, Vanessa, before moving?
And I just love it and totally agree with everything you said. So
right.
And if you want, I can also send you a PDF of this, because I feel like I stumbled on some words because I realized halfway through I should probably have my reading glasses on and not these glasses. But I was like, where are they? I don't know. So I can always send you the PDF if you want to see. No,
I love that too. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Scansion as anti-capitalistic intervention. Great.
Yeah, and that's also why I wanted to present, because the book has a lot of different periods. It has a chapter on film and a performance art and alternate communities and different ways of living and a lot of different other things. But I feel like the stuff that the daughters were doing during the wars, it's so it's so happening now again. So I feel like it's really important to talk about now.
Thank you. Yeah.
Lily, and then Rachel.
So yes, it was just because I love Vanessa. That was just brilliant. I'm completely inspired as creating different artworks and things like that. And for a long time I do that digest, I did it with Letitia Barbery, if you know her.
Of course.
Okay, right. So it was a surrealist little workshop that we did, and we chose an item within, it was the psychic College of the Psychic Studies, and you chose an item in the room and you wrote 3 words and about it, and then you could also write another 3 words regarding a feeling about the object, another 3 words regarding the symbolism around the object, and that was great fun. And then I did it with a friend at home, and what we did was we cut the words up and then we put them in a bag. So we each had chosen different objects and we put them in a bag and then pulled them out, and we actually created a poem to do with the spring equinox. Yeah, things like that. But I was reading, so that's that bit, but I was reading in the press in the UK, I think it was a few days ago, and it was because they're trying to bring in a law about this manipulation of video, where they are taking women specifically, and they're cutting them into video and then posting that video as their porn videos, and then posting videos online for shaming and disempowering women. And I just, yeah, it just sprung to mind as you were talking, especially, you know, regarding in, you know, if you're in a therapy session and that's happened to you. So, you know, it's like that the cutting away of your life, the cutting away of your power. Yeah.
I feel like with these kind of deep fakes, I don't know how we're gonna know what's going on like really anymore soon, you know? So yeah, no, that's a whole can of worms for sure. And I just copied and pasted this book that you
Yeah.
mentioned into my Google so I can check it out because that sounds great.
Yeah, Lilith is suggesting this book, Making Sex, Body, and Gender from Greeks to Freud by Thomas Laqueur, discussing one sex model and two sex model. Thank you, Lilith. Yeah, go. Do you want to say something, Vane, or do we move with Rachel?
I mean, I love what you're doing with the poetry and cutting your words together, the different things that you chose. This is the kind of stuff I do like all the time. So that's right up my alley. I love to see like when I first started making cut-ups myself, which was like I was writing, like I said, these art reviews. And then I started realizing like there's this thread from these artists that they all like seem to work with the cut in some way, or disruption, or like challenging narratives. And then I was like watching a like YouTube video or something with William Burroughs, and he was like, you know, talking how he always talks, but then he's like, you know, you can do this. Anyone can do this. Like, you should try it. And everyone's just like, oh, yeah, you know, great. And then I realized, like, he's like telling people that they should be doing this themselves because you can understand it like theoretically how it works, or you can appreciate the final product that someone presents. But when you actually create cut-ups yourself, like Brian Geisen was saying, and like you see how the different words come together and how, like, yeah, it can be really funny or like poignant or really speak to something that's going on with you, like personally, that you haven't talked about with anyone. Like it's quite amazing. And yeah, and I listened to Burroughs when I was moving into this. I had like left a long relationship and I was moving into my own apartment in Brooklyn for the first time. And I was like, I wonder, you know, if the first thing I do in this new place is like I will create some cut-ups. And I had a piece that I had written about Genesis and Lady J, like with me, that I just like given a talk somewhere or something. So I decided to cut that up. And of course, when you cut up writers or artists that already work with the cut up, it seems to be even more, you know, potent. So it was really interesting. Like the first cut ups that I made from that were like super fantastic. And then I would start like cutting up like, okay, well, what happens if you take like, okay, say like Freud and Jung, you know, had this like split. What if you take like Freud and Jung and you like make them talk to each other again by like mixing their words together? What will that say? And that's kind of fun. And that's one of the things that Burroughs says. It's like that I also really love to do. He said if you have like a favorite writer and you've like read everything they've done and they're dead and they're not going to make any more work, you know, take their work and cut it up and like you know, pull it out randomly and see what it says. And it's like still like the, you know, you don't have to cut out, I don't usually cut out individual words anymore. I usually cut out like phrases and things, or cut things kind of just haphazardly, but like multiple words at a time. So it's still their kind of words and phrasing, but it's put together in a different way. And it's just kind of a fun way to enjoy your work. Or if you're doing your own writing and you're stuck like on a paper that you're working on, that's the best. You can like print out the paper and literally cut it up with scissors and put it into, you know, I use a shoebox and shake it up and then pull it out. And it's like still your words and ideas for the paper you're working on, but it's like put together in ways that you wouldn't consciously do it because we are so kind of married to what we're thinking about in our own narratives. And you're like, oh, I didn't think of connecting that with that. And that it just like sparks so many more kind of insights and inspiration. And then it'll definitely help you through any writer's block you're going on. So definitely recommend that too.
I was thinking, Vanessa, maybe that could be also used in, for example, Lacanian discourse analysis, or like, you know, when you get a number of data that is very formalized by a certain discourse, you do that, like, let's say, like a methodology, it would be really interesting, you know, just because language, you know, it has the unconscious structure as a language, it has a certain way of continuously rotating around the same poles, let's say, or the same sides, and then this is almost like disrupting with the same words, and I think that that's like giving chance a chance, no, like Malibu says. I'm enjoying this a lot.
Yeah, no, it's really great and it's really generative, and yeah, I love doing it. It's like I can't write. I can't like just write normally now. My whole like brain has been rearranged by the cut up method, and I see everything as like, oh, that's a cut up and that's a cut up, and this is like a collage of consciousness, like Jen and Jay said. It's just like yeah, you start kind of seeing it and you can use it in so many different ways.
Great. Just before going to Rachel, Eric says here, Alenka Supanchik call in the context of an interview, maybe with Vanessa, an interpretation in the real, right? This cutting.
Yes, and yeah, Alenka's book on comedy has a really great section on repetition. That yeah, when I was writing this book and writing about cut-ups, it really helped me think of like yeah, the juxtaposition or the repetition that you're cutting. Yeah, she like that, like her writing in that section on repetition from the on comedy book is like the best. So highly recommend if you haven't checked that out yet. She's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Rachel.
Hi, Vanessa. This is fabulous. There's so much going through my mind right now. One thing I'm thinking about is that I also come from kind of a normalizing background of training and counseling psychology, and all of this is making me think about like self-cutting, self-harm. And from that background, like people will just like panic and oh my goodness, we need to assess, and is this person suicidal? And like what like there's just so much that becomes very rigid as soon as self-cutting comes up. And it's making me think about like all the different ways that, you know, body modification is either good or bad, whether it's tattoos and piercings or cutting or anything, right? Um, and how like self-cutting, right? Like in a way, it could be at least maybe when someone initially does it, it is a way of creating the cut themselves, of interrupting whatever is happening. But then it gets maybe over time kind of incorporated into the repetition. And so like the cut needs to be cut or something like that. And I'm just wondering how maybe you think about self-cutting differently, or do you think about it differently as you use cutting so much, as the cut is so much a part of your work?
Yeah, I think that no, it's a good point, and that people usually describe that as like it being some sort of release, like they need to it like
Mhm.
opens up space for them again when they make the cut.
Mhm.
So it definitely seems to serve that purpose, and then yeah, hopefully they can find a different way or a way that works better for them if it becomes disturbing, you know,
Mhm.
or destructive. But yeah, yeah. But I think I'm sure it serves this the same function, at least in the beginning, until it becomes, yeah, its own kind of rut.
Yeah.
Shannon Hurley, do you want to read your question? Or I can read it for you. Okay, I'll do it. Shannon Hurley says, if there's anything that come to mind around montage and the gaze, would you mind speaking to it?
It's me specifically. Anybody can chime in too.
Or anyone? Yeah, anyone about montage and the gaze?
Yeah. Um, the only part that I thought about, at least for this work, about the gaze was really kind of also shifting the gaze. And I guess montage does that in a way as well, as it like disrupts, like Desiree was talking about, with this kind of experimental putting things together that don't belong together. And that's the thing, like just like with us not understanding the impact like photography had and how it's changed everything. It's the same thing when like the Dadaist started doing collage work, and like the Cubists actually did collage first. But when they started doing that, it was like so unheard of. And it really like a lot of people freaked out. Like they're like there's like there were like literal like riots at like art shows because people were doing these things, or like I have a chapter in there on like noise music, and the first person is Italian Luigi Russolo in 1913 who that made this organ that made noises instead of like music, and like yeah, there's like riots at his when he would perform these concerts. It's like people really do not like when you disrupt what they think should be happening. So I think that we don't, nowadays we're so inundated with everything. I think it's hard for us to even understand the impact that these things had when they first came out. But like Duchamp, of course, Marcel Duchamp, of course, he played with the audience very much and like the viewer of the artwork, and in that way was playing with the gaze, I would say, and like the way that one should perceive art in a different way that hadn't been done before. But of course, now artists are doing those kinds of conceptual games all the time.
Oh, great. There's couple of messages before moving to Hara, and maybe this kind of is the wrap up. Shirita said a little life by Anya Yanagiraha writes about the release of the sort of cutting, like self-harm, other so known as that. Mandana says, Mandana, you do want to read it, or maybe she's not around. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for the generous presentation. Mandana says, it would be great if you could speak to the cut in terms of transitioning. Enjoying the cut reminds me of Crimes of Future.
Yeah, Cronenberg. Cronenberg definitely loves the cut. For sure. And Cronenberg also, like, I not too recently, maybe last year, watched his very first film from like 1969, and then Crimes of the Future, like back to back, like one night after the other. And it's the similar themes, but his first film, he was clearly like, yeah, either in film school or just out of film school, but he was definitely like reading psychoanalysis as they do in film studies, which is nice. And he definitely weaves psychoanalysis into his work. Of course, he did A Dangerous Method. And he also did Naked Lunch with Burroughs. So like, yeah, Cronenberg's good. Cronenberg's up my alley. But I feel like, all of this work on the cut and, the manipulation of the body and the image, of course, it speaks to transitioning, not maybe in this way of like scansion of like just a cut opening up something, but the importance for people to be able to, do to themselves as they see fit, as they feel is best for them. And like I said, everybody should have the right to self-determination, because I feel like also, especially now in the digital era and with people understanding more generally how much like others' gaze kind of affects our sense of self, and this mirroring, it's important for people to be able to change themselves physically, whether it's like through surgeries, or whether it's through dress or whatever they see fit. I think it's very important, and definitely has a huge effect, can have a huge effect on someone's sense of self. And so it's very important that that's supported. Absolutely.
Great. Hara, and I think that could be the wrap up. Go ahead, Hara.
Thank you. So, unless it's a matter of my English, however, Vanessa, I heard you at some point using the words scansion and scanning together, which made me think of a scanner, and it led me to the thought that scanning an image is nothing more than, hundreds of sections of the image coming together to present the image. So then that led me to the thought of sectioning, and hence I wanted to say that perhaps there is also a way of thinking of the cat, not as opening space or room for new things to come in, but also functioning as a section that reveals the whole in and of itself. Therefore, even in the thinnest slice, you can find an imprint of the whole and you can work with that. So that was the one thought I was having listening to you. The other is more in the form of a question, which I'm not sure if I can formulate properly, but when you were referring to Tristan Zara and his cat method, using the newspaper and shaking the words and, you know, taking them out and laying them down, I was wondering, what is the position or what is the structure of the artist in the language when one does that? Which is not exactly what is the structure of the person, but what is the structure of an artist? What is their relationship with language? Because in maybe my mistaken understanding, it seems to me that one almost acts from the position of a psychotic, like the relationship to language at that point is a very broken relationship. And I'm wondering whether there is anything we can say on that, or you can correct me, of course.
No, I love those thoughts and ideas. I would say it seems like it definitely would be, but if you try it, then you're not just breaking down the language. It gets put together in new ways, and maybe you're not in control of that. But I guess you have to kind of let go a little bit and allow the chance to kind of work, which could be seen as the unconscious, in a way. But usually, like the thing, like Tristan Zara, he called his poems accidental poems, and he would perform them live in front of an audience at the Cabaret Voltaire. So he would be doing this in front of people, which I can also say is a very interesting effect. Like, it's different when you do share that with people live, like spontaneously, than it is when you do it, yourself at home. It just has a different aspect, to have that social aspect. But also, like, they used to, like, he used newspaper articles, and like Burroughs used a lot of like newspaper articles, and Burroughs used newspaper articles in the way that, like, he was into like breaking down systems of what he called control, and he felt like if you cut up the news, you were like directly acting upon like control's narrative by like cutting it up, which I kind of love. But I found that I don't like using newspapers. I like to use like artists and writers that I like, because I feel like, yeah, their words are already so like beautifully crafted. So then to mix them up, or like my own writing is mixed in there as well, that to me becomes much more meaningful than when it's just like phrases from the newspaper. And I appreciate that concept. So I guess the artist is really only present in that case, like in the material that they choose to cut up to put in the hat or the box. And then after that, it's just kind of left, yeah, to this more chance aspect,
Great. Well, we are like right heading at noon here in Vancouver, anyhow. Vanessa, it has been wonderful. I hope that you come back again. I wanted to mention that Corpo Freudiano is working very hard the rest of this year in planning next year to open to membership, and we are kind of curating all sorts of programming. So hopefully we can have you again, Vanessa. It has been really great. Thank you everyone for showing up, for the wonderful questions, and we keep in touch. We have one more speaker series for the year in a month. It's going to be a woman from Mexico, Leticia Cantu. She's going to be talking about the coloniality and feminism, and hopefully you can join us. And yeah, thank you so much, and help me to give a big applause to Vanessa.
Yeah, thank you for your wonderful comments and thoughts. They're really, yeah, fantastic. Everybody really had such great points. So thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be back anytime.
Definitely. Thank you. And we will have the video very soon to circulate. I'll send it to you, Vanessa, as well.
Okay.
Okay, bye everyone. See you around.